Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Low Carb Lifestyle Podcast. Thank you so much to my friend Richard Turnbull, who is joining us today for a chat and an update and a catch up on what he's been up to. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Tracy. Lovely seeing you, and thanks for having me again.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. So just a little bit of context. I have talked to Richard on the podcast before, so below I'm going to link you into the chat that we had so you can learn about all the work, the wonderful work Richard has done as an exercise physiologist and so much more in his life. And he's also a personal friend of Prof. Tim Noakes and has just done some incredible stuff. And actually Richard found low carb before Prof, and that is something that is pretty special. I think you have a great story where you're laughing at his cereal while you were eating your bacon and eggs.
That's correct. That was in 1987.
Oh my goodness, 1987. It took Prof a little bit longer than that to come to understand the carbs.
Yeah, I think the only problem is I ate low carbs, but high fat. Sorry, I ate high fat, but also high carbs. Because we were told to eat high carbohydrates, but I never stayed away from fat at all. I've always been a high fat eater, but healthy fats, not the trans fats and the margarines and so on, the butter and the cheese and the fat of meat and avocados and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. All the stuff that we can actually get the fat from the actual, animal or the coconut, or it makes sense when you think of it that way.
That's right.
So what's been happening, Richard? So could you want to just give everyone a little bit of an update? I will, as I said, link to that last chat where we had really learned about what it was that you were doing. But I'd love you just to tell us what you've been doing since that chat.
Well, I currently continue working in private practice as an exercise physiologist, prescribing exercise and lifestyle change to clients presenting with various pathologies. But then I also consult in the corporate wellness industry, which is quite interesting. And, that's quite a long story, which I can't elaborate on here. And I also have a special interest in providing nutrition information to clients, who suffer from diabetes or the metabolic syndrome, and those wishing to improve sport performance as well, because that's quite an important one. And, there's a bit of a story I can tell about that one, about the rugby, maybe later on. But also over the past 5 years, I've also delivered what they call the BEAT program, which is under the umbrella of Diabetes New South Wales and ACT. But unfortunately, towards the end of February, I decided to withdraw my services there because of a few differences I have about the nutrition section of the program. Now, maybe I should provide some background about the program if you're happy to do so, Tracy, and then we can go from there if you want.
Absolutely, because I'm fascinated about what you're going to tell us here, because I think then the Diabetes Association came out and endorsed a low carbohydrate diet as an option for people with diabetes, possibly just in their position statement. So I'm really interested to know what that looks like in terms of what their the actual advice that they're giving to people that use their services. So let's go.
So the BEAT program is basically a community-based program which was developed by Diabetes New South Wales and ACT around about, I'm not sure, but early 2010.
Okay.
Now, to deliver the program, one has to attend a diabetes, what they call a BT trainers program, which is actually quite a good program. And the program runs for 8 weeks and provides 16 one-hour exercise sessions and 6 30-minute education sessions for groups up to 16 if it's face-to-face. Or there could be groups up to about 6 on the online program, and that came about, due to COVID.
Mm.
And then the physical activity, and then they have around about 6, as I mentioned, 6 education sessions, and that varies from physical activity for health and smarter goals and understanding diabetes and exercise for blood glucose levels, and those are pretty good. But then there are two lessons which are called Eat for Health and Building Healthy Meals. And that's where I have a bit of a problem with the program. And then exercise physiologists are actually, delivering that section of the course as well, which makes it a bit difficult for people like myself who have done a lot of the studies on the new science with, in the space of low carb. So up until about 2 years ago, the education sessions were via PowerPoint. And that made it relatively easy because there was good interaction between the group and yourself, and you could actually give them information on the new science. But then they changed and they brought out what they call an education facilitator's handbook. And they don't want one to deviate from the handbook. Okay,
so Richard, what you used to do, you created those presentations. That wasn't what they told you to say or anything like that.
So the presentations were actually given by them, but you could discuss issues around them and bring in other things as well. Because when a question was asked, you could then answer the question according to what you may know about the new science. So it was pretty good. Okay. And then they brought out this facilitator's handbook, which isn't bad for the other lessons, but for the nutrition, there are a couple of issues there that I have questions about. So the expectation is for the facilitator to remain neutral as far as it pertains to information outside of the handbook, and for the group to find solutions for themselves. And that makes it very difficult because a lot of these individuals do a lot of reading, okay?
Yeah.
And a lot of them are relatively up to date, so they ask you questions about the new science. So now
when you're talking about the new science, are you talking about the low carbohydrate? Yeah.
The low carbohydrate science and the benefit it has in reducing blood sugar levels and putting type 2 into remission and so on. Mm. So they don't want you to talk about that. So that makes it very difficult. Okay. And so what I then decided to do on the last two sessions was to deviate from the facilitator's handbook. Mm. And I went back to a PowerPoint presentation. And I gave them, everything I basically know about low carb and the definition of low carb and what the current science is saying. I spoke about Verta Health, and I even spoke about the direct study and, the one I did in England, which is a low calorie. So I gave them a pretty good understanding of the low carb space. Mm. And they were pretty happy with it because they were no longer confused. All right.
So you're talking about the participants were pretty happy with it.
The participants were very happy with it. So that was good. Mm-hmm. What I then did the next day, which happened to be the 22nd of February, I phoned the project manager and I told him what I had done. And I actually deviated from the handbook. He didn't say very much, but I got an email the next day that they were requesting a meeting.
Before you go ahead, sorry, Richard, can I just clarify, when you're talking about the handbook, so I'm assuming that is that in that handbook, they don't advocate for low carb, they don't have it as an option, even though it's part of their position statement now that it is an option. The handbook is pretty much the standard dietary guidelines. Is that right?
That's correct. It's based on the standard Australian guidelines.
Okay, interesting.
Nutrition guidelines. So maybe I can get to that after this and look at some of the questions within the handbook and the answers they expect. Really, in other words, the answers they don't want you to actually deviate from.
Yep.
Right. So I called him and then I got an email and they requested a meeting. Okay. And during the meeting, they were very concerned about me deviating from the handbook. Okay. So, I acknowledged, that's probably my only wrongdoing on the whole thing. And then they questioned my scope of practice, that I was actually outside of my scope of practice, which is not quite true. And we can get to that later. Mm. So that's when went. And then they wrote me a letter and said to me, I'm not allowed to do any more lectures on the education, on the nutrition side of things. And if I were to continue with the exercises and the education section of the exercise, I would have to video it, send it to them so that they could make sure that I'm not deviating from the handbook at all. Now, I find that a little bit sort of insulting in a sense. I've been in this space of exercise for 38 years as an accredited exercise physiologist, and I still remain a student because I learn something every day. But what I gather, nobody else was asked to video their session. So I think what it was is putting a bit of pressure on me because of me speaking within the space of a low carb intervention, I think. But anyway, the interesting thing is, prior to me giving that talk, we got a lecture from one of their qualified people within the space of nutrition, and she spoke about the low carb diet, and that they wanted to actually give us some information about the low carb for the beta trainers, and it was actually quite good. There were a few questions that I didn't quite agree with, like the brain can only use glucose for fuel and so on. So, and then in October, in their position statement, they acknowledged fully that it's possible to put type 2 diabetes into remission. So they acknowledged that, and that was in October last year. And this is why I felt that discussing low carb for diabetes is not an issue, shouldn't be an issue for them because they've already acknowledged it. Now, within their position statement, they looked at 3 clinical trials. They looked at 3 trials. And they looked at the direct study one. Now, the direct study one is a UK study. It's basically, the direct means diabetes remission clinical trial. It's basically a low-calorie diet, and they had a 46% remission amongst the type 2 diabetics in the first year, 46%. It's actually quite a good program, and it was basically done by Professor Roy Taylor from Newcastle University, and also co-led by Professor Mike Lean from Glasgow. And they've also recently published a book, I think it's called Life Without Diabetes.
Okay.
But it's basically a low-calorie diet. Okay, so got a 46% remission, so they looked at that. Then there was another study that they mentioned, and if I recall, it's on page 5 of their position statement. And this study is called the Diadem Study, which is basically a study of people from the Middle East and North Africa. But the group that they studied were under 50, and they had diagnosed with diabetes 2 within 3 years. So they had to have had the diagnosis within 3 years and under 50. It was also low-calorie, low-energy replacement meals, and they had a 61% remission of their diabetes group in the first year. Then they looked at Virta Health as well, which I found very interesting, but they incorrectly stated, and you're going to go and have a look at the position statement, incorrectly stated that Virta had a 25% remission success in the first year, which is incorrect. Virta had a 63% remission in the first year. So why they made that mistake, I don't know. They obviously didn't look at the study. They must have got that figure from somewhere. Anyway, so that's that story. And then with the scope of practice, well, they were completely wrong there, because I went through ESSA, Exercise and Sports Science Australia, which is our national body. And I said to them, I want to do the Nutrition Network courses. I think They are very good courses. Anyway, I left it with them for 2 weeks. They made contact with ESSA. They looked at it and they thought it was a brilliant course. So they gave me permission to do the course. And I could
Are you talking about ESSA or diabetes?
diabetes. ESSA. So diabetes,
okay.
So diabetes basically questioned me that I was actually discussing issues outside of my scope of practice, which I wasn't, because I'd gone through ESSA and I asked their permission to do the Nutrition Network courses, and they thought it was a very good course after looking through it and looking at the credentials of the presenters and so on. Anyway, so I did the course, but I also went through the Rural Doctors Network and put it to them, and they looked at it and they were extremely happy about the course, the Nutrition Network course. They even paid for my courses, which was very interesting. So discussing these issues is within my scope of practice, because I got permission from my national body. So that wasn't an issue. So they kept quiet about that one. And then I wrote a letter and I said to them, look, I'm not going to continue with it. It's probably in the best interest for them and myself at this stage until the nutrition aspect of their course changes. I still haven't heard, I've had no response from them. That letter was written on the 28th of February. I've had no correspondence from them at all on this issue, which is sad really, because the course they're offering is actually a very good course, except for the nutrition side. They need to change that, because I was just giving it the thought now the other day, if they had changed and accepted the low carb lifestyle for their diabetic groups, you may have put hundreds of diabetic Jews into remission by now over the last 5-6 years. Because on the 15th of August 2015, Diabetes New South Wales, in their position statement, or the national body, should I put it, acknowledged that low carb has a role to play within type 2 diabetes. In the short term, at that stage they mentioned, we knew that it was a really long term.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But it's interesting because it's not even, it's just about giving people options. And that's all you did. You answered people's questions, and seemingly they already had someone come in and speak to you who was you said was a dietitian who, mostly got the low carb message correct. But, they're saying one thing up here, but it seems at the ground level that message isn't coming through. Do you think that is a cultural, or why do you think that's happening? Do you think it may be coming down to this person that you've been dealing with, or?
Well, the person I was dealing with, it wouldn't just be his decision because he's employed, although he's a project manager. He's a very young person. I think he's very enthusiastic, but he's in a position of power, I think, and needs to show his authority maybe. And then, with the organization Diabetes, I'm not sure. I think they're trying. I mean, they're looking at the direct study, and they seem to like that avenue. And they are making changes, but they're extremely slow. And they still believe the low carb space is very controversial.
I know.
It's no longer controversial.
There's nothing controversial about it at all. It's all in their head. I just, and all that does is confuse people and, not give them the options that people are entitled to have. It's up to them whether they do it or not, but give people the right information to make their choices. That's
correct. And so, and there might be a little bit of sponsors involved, maybe, I don't know.
Just a little bit.
and they might have been told, to slow down a little bit, else we put our sponsorships. I don't know, I mean, that's assumption. I'm sure that's possibly part of it. But if you go to the facilitator's handbook, one of the key messages under that section, and this is what they basically say, which is a good sentence. They said, foods low in carbohydrates but high in protein or rich in protein or fat do not cause the same blood glucose levels rise as
Okay.
carbohydrate-rich food. So they say that.
Okay.
Then under that they say, so, I still remember very clearly, so it's on page 55, 56. So, comma, if carbohydrate-rich foods raise blood glucose, do you need to avoid them if you live with diabetes? Question mark. Okay. Then they come and they say their answer in capital letters, no. You don't have to avoid carbohydrates because glucose is the only type of energy or fuel that the brain can use. And I know that very clearly. It's there in black and white. And that didn't sit very well with me because I have issues with this. Science clearly shows us that the brain functions very well using ketones as fuel. We know that.
Yeah.
And if you go back in history, you go in 1929, before 1921, you know, the ketogenic diet, for an example, was effectively used for epileptic sufferers. Very low carbohydrates. They got very good outcomes. And then they started forgetting about it. It's coming back again. If you have a look at some of the other good work done by, you know, neurologists such as Dr. Dale Pedersen, and he wrote this book, The End of Alzheimer's, and Dr. David Perlmutter, who's also a neurologist, and Dr. Robert Lustig, pediatric endocrinologist, and he's just written a brilliant book called Metabolical. And you get Professor Mark Mattson, who's a neuroscientist, and Dr. Eric Westman. And so you can continue and continue. Professor Tim Noakes. They've proven all this. They've proven that the brain functions very well on ketones as well. Then there was another, then below that sentence, they said that eating carbs regularly rather than an all or nothing approach helps to keep blood sugar levels within a healthy range throughout the day. So they recommend carbs regularly throughout the day. So obviously you're going to have this continuous spiking of glucose, continuous release of insulin if you're not a diabetic, or you're going to have to make sure that your medication is on par with the carbohydrate intake you're taking. So, you know, some of the issues. And then, you know, if you go further and you look at the glycative stress research study, which was done in 2016, for an example, where they proved that healthy infants stay in ketosis for at least the first month of life. I can't find any other studies beyond the first month of life. So children, infants, their brains use about 30% ketones, and they develop very quickly, their brains. And in fact, indeed, the US Food and Nutrition Board of 2005, in their textbook, I can't recall exactly the name of the textbook, but it's the US Food and Nutrition Board's 205 textbook. And what they actually stated, they said that the lower limit of dietary carbohydrate compatible with life is apparently 0. It's like a lot of people are starting to realize that you probably don't need any carbohydrates for humans to survive, but you need healthy fats and you need protein. And that was in 2005. So to simply say that the brain, the fuel for the brain is only glucose is totally incorrect.
Wrong. Yeah.
We know that it does need some glucose, and even in the absence of carbohydrates, the liver can produce
That's right.
glucose by process of gluconeogenesis. We know that.
That's right. So they say the correct statement at the top, but then they get all caught up in their own ideologies and their own beliefs and their own, non-scientific agenda when they're trying to explain it. And that, again, just confuses people.
That's right. It's very confusing. So there was one comment they made as well that I was probably confusing the clients in the group. And in fact, after the lectures, the clients were extremely happy. They said, that's cleared it up. We now have a clear understanding of what we're heading to. In fact, that specific lecture was recorded because there was one person couldn't make it. So it actually sent to her, and I have a suspicion they contacted her and had a look at the lecture because they did ask me 1 or 2 questions that came out of the lecture, which is totally correct. I still have that lecture, fortunately. You know, they wanted to study it, they're welcome. So everything I said in there was entirely science-based. There was nothing wrong with it. It was based on what we know up until this point.
Yeah.
I have no problem with the content at all. So,
I think it's just interesting that, you know, I don't know what their future plans are or where they're heading, or, you know, but people really need to be aware that, you know, they're saying one thing with one hand, but doing another thing with another hand. And the way they've treated you, Richard, is just, it's disgusting. I can't believe that they haven't even responded. But to say to you, the most qualified person I know around, that they are so lucky to have had on their team, to say to you, you have to record your sessions, you know, like, so we watch you like you're a preschooler, is just so disrespectful and disgusting. And I think it's appalling, and people need to know about this, and they should be called out about it. So, you know, I think it's fantastic that you're talking to me about it, and, you know, people just need to know this stuff.
Yeah, I think it was poor management really from the particular person, I thought. But I did acknowledge that it was wrongdoing, moving away from what they basically expected from the handbook. But you know, when you know the science, you can't get involved on the nutrition side of that handbook, because it's not totally correct. There are certain aspects in there that are correct, but generally it's not. And by following that type of lifestyle, you're not going to put your doctor into remission when they've already acknowledged that low carbs is correct. In fact, I actually put into the letter as well, what they should really do is get dietitians to conduct the course on the nutrition side of education, and don't put exercise physiologists who are up to date with the science to do the course, because it puts them under tremendous stress and a lot of anxiety that goes with it.
Why do you think they do that? Why do you think they've asked exercise physiologists? Is it because initially they had it as a real exercise-focused program?
Well, it's both. It's education and exercise, but it's very much exercise, and that's good. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the way the course is run, except for the nutrition intervention, the nutrition education side, because it's got to be revamped. You cannot continue with everything that is put into the education of the nutrition side. So you've got to look at that. Definitely got to do that. So I can't get involved with that until they improve it. You know, they'll probably be a bit angry with me, but you've got to talk about these things, because we have a duty of care to the client. Yeah. It's not about me I've got to give the correct information, because we have his duty of care at heart. And that's the important thing.
Absolutely. Do you know if this program is national? Do they have it in other states, or is it only in New South Wales?
I'm not sure. I think it's an initiative on New South Wales ACT, as I mentioned, 2010, where they developed the program. I did the beta course in 2017, so I've been involved with it for 5 years. There's never been an issue until I did, you know, until this thing was recorded, and I got hold of it, and I mentioned to them that I deviated from the handbook.
That's because you're so honest. This is your integrity coming to play, which just goes to show just what how much this is important to you, to be honest, and to make sure that you stick to your scope of practice. You've done everything right, Richard. And
I think honesty is important. And once I'd finished the meeting and I'd written my letter, and I thought to myself, if I never said anything, that I'd actually deviated, probably nothing would have come of it. But I'm not like that. You know, I tell them as it is, and that's what it was. And it came back probably to haunt me in a sense, but maybe not, because maybe some good will come out of it, where they would now put into practice what they've acknowledged in the position statement. They've clearly acknowledged it. They've acknowledged that you can put it into remission. they tend to favor the low calorie direction, which is not sustainable in the long term. We know that.
Well, that's my question to you. They've got these studies that, show that certain percentage, have put their diabetes into remission after a year. I'd be very interested as to what happens in 5 years, because I work with clients every day who have tried calorie restricting, and we know what that does for our brain. And, I've worked with Dr. Georgia Eade's program, and the brain requires ketones at times to be considered an optimal healthy diet for the brain. And like reducing calories, we know what that does to our mental health. It's difficult, and we feel hungry all the time, and it's not a sustainable way to put diabetes in remission.
No. So yeah, and it's such a simple way, the low carb lifestyle, because you're eating real food and you're eating as much as you want. Basically, it's got nothing to do with calories as such. It's good food. It's meat and fish and green veggies for those who want it. It doesn't really matter, and that's all it is. It's like your great grandmother ate, really.
Yeah.
And there's no sugar and processed foods and industrial oils.
Yeah.
And real food, and then watching your carbohydrate intake and see what works for you as an individual.
That's right.
So, yeah. So anyway, so that was that issue. And while we've been chatting, I've been thinking about even in the low carb space, something we often neglect to look at is the soil.
Yeah.
In other words, where's our food coming from? So we may be eating healthy low carbs and healthy food and real food, but where's the food coming from? I'm started becoming very interested in sort of soil science in a way, and it's amazing. I was reading an article now the other day that around about 70% of the Earth's soil has been contaminated with chemicals. And these destroy the microorganisms of the soil, which we need as well.
Yeah.
And I was thinking specifically of glyphosate.
Oh, yes.
Glyphosate was brought to the market in 1974 under the brand name Roundup by Monsanto. And it's just causing havoc. It's all sorts of problems are being published now about the side effects and the damage that glyphosate is causing. And there was actually quite an interesting paper published in 2016 by the University of California in San Francisco. And they discovered that 93% of samples collected throughout the US from individuals, 93% of the urine samples had glyphosate in them. 93%. So I think we need to start talking about the importance of soil and regenerative farming and things like that, because we are better off if our low carb food is coming from healthy soil as well. I think.
So how's that changed, the way your decision making and what you eat, with what you're learning about the soil? I mean, has that changed anything for you?
Well, there's very little we can do about what's happening because, the sprays they use. But if you can grow your own veggies in your garden, organic is obviously the way to go, if that's possible, which is also quite difficult because a lot of the organic farms are in between.
Yeah, I know.
The farm. So
they've got one fence as a barrier or something. Yeah.
So when you go shopping, eat grass-fed meat. Don't eat, meat coming from feedlots, because what the animal is eating, you're basically eating as well. So grass-fed is better than feedlot. We know that. This is why a lot of the research where they say meat is bad for you, is it the meat or is it the chemicals in the meat? And in fact, meat has never been proved to have any adverse effects.
No,
there's a lot of this sort of theories and all sorts of things that go with it.
Yeah, but it's also the bun and the all the other stuff people eat with their meat generally, the sugar laden sauces and, all the other stuff that might be, Oh no, it's just, well, we love our meat.
Yeah, and then there, sometimes a question arises from the diabetic groups or the medical profession or whoever, is that if you follow a low carb, you've got to then adjust and increase your protein and obviously healthy fats or fats. So you've got to compensate. So you change and increase probably both. And then the question often arises, but because they're diabetic and a lot of them have got early stage or late stage chronic kidney disease, by increasing their protein could damage kidneys. Now that's quite an interesting point, because if you are at the end stage possibly and you're eating a lot of protein, it probably could be harmful. But there's been a lot of research. I mean, Dr. David Unwin recently, published a paper. We did that sort of study, type 2 diabetes, and measured the estimated glomerular filtration rate before and after low carb diet over a 30-month period. I think there were about 146 patients. And in fact, the GFR went up. So 40% of the patients improved their GFR. 40% remained the same. In other words, it didn't have any negative effect or positive amongst them. And only 20% got worse. Those 20% probably would have got worse anyway. And the other nephrologists like Dr. Jason Fung and Sarah Ewan, and I can't remember, there's a nephrologist from Brazil as well, and he did an interesting research and found the same thing, that up to 1.3 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein didn't have any negative effect on these chronic kidney disease patients.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because I think generally as a population we undereat protein, and I really think that most people think it's too much. It's probably not even still enough. It's such an issue. I don't think I have one client sitting in front of me eating enough protein when they first start. Because one of the questions I ask them is, what do you think is an optimal diet? And lots of veggies, lots of fruit, and lean dairy maybe, and lean meats. And it's like, okay, nope, let's flip it around.
And in that space of protein, it's quite interesting that there's so many different opinions. I don't know if you've read or listened to quite a few of Dr. Zach Bush's podcasts. He's quite an astute guy. He's an internal physician, and I think he's got other specialities as well. And he's very much into sort of soil and regenerative farming. But I find it quite strange. He did it, I think, in the last week. I think he mentioned that he only recommends 20 to 40 grams of protein a day, preferably even, which is about 10% of your daily intake of your food, which is extremely low. So he basically, although such an intelligent person, feels that we're all eating too much protein.
What?
And I question that quite a bit. And I mean, I'm not up to the same standard as he is in terms of science, but it doesn't make sense. If you go through evolution, humans evolved by eating meat and roots, and, seasonal berries possibly, and that type of stuff, and built up uric acid and, hibernated when they, that sort of stuff. So I question that. That's very low. And I think we all know that as you get older, you start developing sarcopenia.
Yeah,
you need to try and prevent that. So you need to do some sort of strength training and up your protein a bit so you can feed your muscle cells.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So that was very interesting, that Zach Bush is a little bit on the other side of low protein, which worries me a little bit.
There was a couple, like I remember when I first came into low carb space, nearly 9 years ago, like protein was that moderate, keep it moderate, because there was always that concern that it would too much would turn into, would spike your blood sugar and excess glucose and stuff. And of course, that was what the initial thought was, until we realized, well, actually there's so much goodness in protein that any little spike is counterbalanced by all the goodness of what you're eating.
And it's short.
Yes, that's right. But I also remember there was a doctor, gosh, and I cannot remember his name. He looks like a bit of a cowboy, but he talked about the mTOR problem. You know, when you ate too much protein, there was this problem with mTOR, which I now know has been, you know, debunked as well. But, you know, I think there are people out there that still believe in, you know, the minimal amount of protein and reducing the protein. So there must be some sort of science out there showing that might be, you know, whether it's, you know, just bad science. I don't know. I don't know where it's coming from, because, you know, I say to my clients, well, just let's give it a go, especially the ones that are a little bit, you know, what about bowel cancer, and what about this? And, you know, we're so told it's not good for us, blah, blah, blah. I say, well, you know, I'm going to give you I'm going to send you a lot of stuff to read that's going to, you know, help make you feel more at peace with the decision. But also I want you to give it a go for a month. Let's just go for a month and see how you feel. And of course, they always feel better. So, you know, I think it's that, you know, you can read and you can listen and everyone's got their own opinion. But at the end of the day, when you do it yourself and you feel it, it's like, I mean, I don't care what anyone says to me about meat now. I mean, I'll never reduce my meat unless I can't afford it. That's
You look very well.
Yeah, and I feel, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing. But yeah, that's very true. And you just mentioned mTOR, and I don't know too much about it, but my feeling is from somebody who doesn't really know much about it. Sure, protein does increase mTOR, but so do many other things.
Yeah.
I think if protein increases mTOR, it's probably short-lived. It doesn't affect it for a longer period.
Yeah.
If you're insulin resistant, I think, and if you are on a high refined carbohydrate diet and processed foods and things like that, I reckon the spiking of mTOR would spike, and it would remain spiked for longer. It's just a theory I have, and it's a feeling I have whether that could be the case. So I think you're quite right. The effect is minimal, and it probably isn't an issue. I know that it would be interesting to see what happens down the line.
Yeah, it would be. But I think the other factor that people don't consider, and this is what I talk a lot about with my clients as well, is that, you know, you've got to look at nutrients, the food in terms of nutrients. What our body wants is nutrients. Now, if you eat a high carbohydrate diet, even if it's mostly not refined, even if it's real whole carbs, you are missing a huge amount of nutrients that we know we can only get from animal products. So it's this, you know, I don't know what, you know, why people don't take that in. But when I talk to my clients around nutrients, I said, that's what your body wants. If you don't give your body enough nutrients, it will keep sending signals out for you to eat until it gets what it needs. So, you know, when you look at a piece of meat or you look at the nutrition in animal food, it just does not compare, particularly when you look at the bioavailability of it, to plant food. So, you know, again, it's just nutrients. That's what our body wants. Let's put as much of that in, and then watch how we don't need to be as hungry, and we don't need to eat anywhere near as much as when we are eating a whole lot of carbohydrates.
Sure. You know, that's an interesting comment. Within that facilitator's handbook as well, they do mention that if you go on a low carb, you're going to be missing out on certain nutrients.
What nutrients?
And that's wrong. And the thing is, you can miss out on nutrients in any diet. I think what people sometimes find, if people have been following a Western diet, the typical, you know, refined carbs and all the sugars and processed foods, and they stop that and they become vegan or they become vegetarian or carnivore, they're all going to improve. They're all going to improve their blood sugars. But in the long term, you're going to find deficiencies definitely in a vegan. B12 is a common one. I know vegans that have to go every 3 months for B12 injections. Their iron levels drop. Yeah. And many other things as well.
So it's much more about taking that stuff out, really, isn't it? You know, you get that temporary lift because you're taking out all the crap and eating more real food.
Right. So then they start believing this is the best diet.
Yeah.
But it's not proven. And a lot gets spoken about fiber as well. Now, I'm not an expert. I have my sort of own feeling about fiber. Now, we know fiber passes right through, so it's not really giving you any nutrients as such. But I think our microbes like some fiber. So we are more microbes than we are human. They're within our body. So a little bit of fiber probably wouldn't go astray, I feel. We've got to look at the science as it progresses. So having your green vegetables every now and then, if you know, or something different, or even on a carnivore, because you're still having some fiber within that diet. So maybe a little bit of fiber, maybe some scientists feel you don't need fiber at all. But then, we don't, but our microbes do.
Yeah, but I think, as you say, like it'd be virtually impossible to not get something from the food we eat. I think the issue that people kind of believe is that it has to be the all brand. You know, that if you're not having the all brand, you're not getting, you know, oh my gosh, I could never do that to my guts. I mean, that used to be
sugar.
Oh, and it tastes like cardboard.
Yeah, if you have occasional broccoli or kale or, you know, spinach and, you know, something minor, not in big. You know, I'm a great meat eater, but I do have some vegetables too. I quite like them. You know, the green ones especially, occasionally the yellow. I'm sort of probably moderate to low. I'm not really insulin resistant. I'm more insulin sensitive.
Yeah.
But I've got to watch, because there was one stage in my life, in my younger days, that my liver function wasn't all that good. That showed me, and I was eating a lot of carbs, but I was also eating a lot of fat. And that is the danger. It wasn't the fact that I was eating a lot of healthy fats and meat and stuff. It was the fact that I was also eating a lot of carbohydrates, because we were told to. I was a coach of elite sports people, and that's what we were told to do. And that's brought me to quite an interesting story as well. When I was with the Springbok rugby team and we traveled to Australia in '93, and I was responsible for their fitness and their nutrition. So I contacted a sports nutritionist by the name of Janet Heffer. She's well known in South Africa at that time. She compiled a diet for the players. And the carbohydrate content was between 400 and 500 grams a day. That's what it was those days. So I used to sit at the head of our journey to the next venue, and we'd have our own little room, and they'd cook all the food for us, and we'd just eat carbohydrates. We spent 2 months in Australia. We lost 3 games out of 12. We lost the test series 1-2. And we just come out of political isolation as well. And then when we went straight after that, within 3 weeks, we went to Argentina for a month. And I decided, because it was my responsibility, we're going to have no nutrition diet. We're going to go to Argentina. And they eat meat 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And I gave the players full range, eat what you want. So they ate meat 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Sounds like my dream.
Yes. I'll sort of, if I do a bit of a calculation like Judge now, I would estimate they were eating between about 100 and 130 grams of carbs a day, maximum. And that they got from when they were playing at halftime, give them a bit of a energy drink or something like that. And there was no difference in performance. In fact, they only lost 1 game on that tour. They won all the test games. I'm not saying that that's an observation. Now, I started thinking then already in '93. I ate a lot of fat, but I also ate a lot of carbs. But when I went to Argentina, I went back to, I didn't eat much carbs. And there was no difference in their performance. And we sort of understand they didn't run out of blood sugar or blood glucose, or their muscles weren't depleted of glycogen. So we know, those are the 2 things that make you hit a wall if you go to maximum. So the blood sugars have to always be kept up, and your liver's got to make sure you've got a little bit of carbs. So what I do with my top sports people that are on a ketogenic diet is to take some carbohydrates during their endurance event, and it can, and not a lot. You don't need a lot. The liver only needs about 25 grams of carbohydrates to keep it replenished, so that it can actually produce the glycogen or glucose. So that was an interesting one One tour, lots of carbs. One tour, very low carbs, and they perform the same.
Interesting, isn't it? I think, it's what people don't realize. They really, because of the diet that we're mostly, put on as soon as we're born, in the world now, like we have to really build that machinery to allow our body to be fat adapted and to use that fuel, which requires, obviously, yes, the change in diet, and then you got to tweak it and, individualize from there. But if we don't actually build it, we're just that, I want to be able to run on both fuels. That's my thing, Like I know the benefit of being fat adapted for me. I mean, I never eat before I train. I mean, I'm not doing huge long distances or anything now, and I'm certainly not an athlete, but, I just love that I can get up, do my day, go exercise, do my training. I don't have to think about any food or anything. I feel great. And when I get hungry, I do eat. But being able to have that dual fuel system is fantastic. But you've got to build, unless we were living the way it used to be before the diet industry or the processed food industry came on board and they changed the dietary guidelines. I mean, that was different back then. I think, you look at people from the 70s and beyond, everyone was lean because they were just eating real food and, they ate when they were hungry and they did a lot of manual work. But it's just so different, the environment that we're in now. So we have to kind of, make that effort, if you like, to build what we need to have that,
That's
fat burning machinery.
Yeah, I'm sure you're fat adapted and you can switch between the two because you become fat adapted and you're able to do that, And I think that's important, but it's also good for your general health. I mean, your brain,
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of research on ketones and the benefit effect of cognitive decline.
Oh,
I know that. And so that's another topic. And so to make a statement that the brain can only function in the presence of, and that's enough for the book, and that's not good. Yeah, that's got to change.
Yeah. It has. And as I said, the work I did with Georgia Ed, I loved it. So like understanding, that ketones the brain loves ketones. They can cross that blood-brain barrier very easily. But when we become insulin resistant, so glucose can still go through to the brain really easily, but insulin doesn't. So, it's like our brain starts swimming in all this energy, but it's starving because it can't actually access that energy. So it's so important to, give people the right information.
Yeah, that's she's such a good scientist.
She's brilliant.
And I think this is why they're starting to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, because you might have a lot of glucose, as you've just mentioned, but you're insulin resistant in the brain. So it's been starved of energy. And the only other way to then get the energy is from ketones. And so I think it's quite important for certain people that have certain genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And that's another debate, whether it be the APOE4 gene maybe, or having both, or having only one of them. But those are only risk factors. They are not triggers. If you don't provide the trigger, then you might slow down or might not get Alzheimer's, even if you have a genetic predisposition for Alzheimer's. So lifestyle is vitally important, and I think diet is number one, together with many other things, sleep and exercise and those other things.
Yeah. Oh, where did you go, Richard? I can't see you.
Ooh.
If your camera's gone off or something.
Yeah, how do I put it on? I'm not sure.
I don't know. How funny.
There we are.
There you are. Oh, but you're dark now.
No, I've got I don't know what's happened there.
The light got off or something.
Yeah, it just went off.
Can you turn it? Because I'll take this a little bit out. Can you turn it on and off again so I can try? Because I want to finish it properly.
How do I?
Now you're off. No. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh well.
It's done it before, basically in Zoom. I'm not sure.
Oh, that's funny. All right. Well, we'll I'll wrap it up now anyway, and I'll edit this little bit out. But thank you, Richard, so much for coming and sharing. Sorry about the screen. Richard's camera's light's just gone off, so you can't see him there, but you got to see and enjoy him for all the conversation. And I'm really honoured that you came and shared that information with us. And and thank you for sharing with everybody, because people do need to know.
Thank you very much, Tracy. And it's good chatting to you, and you're doing such good work, and keep going. Don't stop.
Thank you.
Don't stop.
Thank you. Thank you. It's easy when I've got good friends like you to support me. So thanks, Richard.
Thank you very much.